It all started on a snowy Christmas morning when a lonely mechanic opened his shop for one last customer and found something far more powerful than work: a family. What would you have done in his place? Tell me in the comments before you hear what happened next. The morning light crept through the frosted windows of Carter's auto repair, painting soft streaks of gold across the worn concrete floor. Outside, snow drifted down in lazy spirals, settling over the quiet town like a blanket of stillness. Inside, the only sound was the faint hum of a heater and the rhythmic clink of tools being arranged by a man who had long grown used to the silence. Elliot Carter was 35, with hands calloused from years spent under hoods and engines, while the rest of the world celebrated Christmas surrounded by laughter. He stood alone in his modest garage, wiping grease from his palms with a rag that had seen better days. "Not everyone gets to take the day off," he murmured to himself. A phrase he had repeated so often it almost felt like truth, but deep down, even he knew it was just an excuse, a way to fill the empty space where family used to be. The little artificial Christmas tree sat on the counter, its lights blinking unevenly, one bulb stubbornly flickering out of rhythm. He had bought it years ago, back when he still believed small things could change the feeling of a place. Now it was more habit than hope. Still, when the tiny lights cast their faint glow across the shop, it softened the edges of the loneliness just a little. He poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee, the kind that tasted more like metal than comfort, and leaned against the workbench. Outside, the sound of distant carols floated faintly through the cold air. Neighbors celebrating, children laughing, doors opening to welcome guests in from the snow. Elliot smiled faintly at the thought, though it did not quite reach his eyes. He used to love that sound. He used to belong somewhere. The old radio on the shelf crackled, searching for a station. Static. Then the soft voice of Bing Crosby filled the air, singing about a white Christmas. Elliot paused his work, the song stirring something he had not let himself feel in a long time. Nostalgia, maybe even longing. For a brief moment, the scent of motor oil and metal seemed to fade, replaced by the memory of warm dinners and the glow of a living room fire. But memories do not fix what is gone, he thought, setting the mug down and returning to his tools. It was not that he disliked Christmas, he just no longer knew what to do with it. Yet, as he adjusted a wrench on an old Chevy engine, a faint smile tugged at his lips. Somewhere out there, people were sharing gifts, holding hands, whispering love. And though his life had grown smaller, though the world outside felt distant and glittering and far away, there was still a quiet peace in knowing he could keep something running. Machines, if not hearts. Elliot Carter did not expect this Christmas to be any different from the last. But sometimes the loneliest days have a way of surprising us. Sometimes all it takes is one broken car and one knock on the door to change everything. The snow had thickened by late morning, falling in heavy, silent sheets that muffled the sound of passing cars and turned the world beyond Elliot's shop window into a blur of white. He had just set down his wrench, rubbing his aching fingers for warmth, when the faint sputter of an engine reached his ears, uneven, desperate, and growing closer. A moment later, a sleek gray sedan rolled into view, its tires crunching over the snow before coming to an abrupt stop outside. Through the frosted glass, Elliot saw a woman step out, bundled in a long wool coat, her breath forming small clouds in the cold. She looked around as if unsure whether the shop was even open, then spotted the flicker of Christmas lights inside and hurried toward the door. When she pushed it open, a gust of icy wind followed her in. "Excuse me," she said, voice trembling from both cold and embarrassment. "I am so sorry to bother you on Christmas, but my car just gave up a mile down the road." "I did not know where else to go." Elliot blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. It had been hours since anyone had stepped through that door, but then he saw the small figure standing just behind her. A boy, no more than 7, clutching a carefully wrapped present to his chest. His cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, and his wide eyes darted curiously around the shop. "You are not bothering me at all," Elliot said with a gentle smile. "Let us take a look at that car." The woman exhaled in relief, shoulders softening. "Thank you, really. I am Claire Bennett," she said, extending a gloved hand. "And this is my son, Jamie." "Nice to meet you both," Elliot replied, shaking her hand before pulling on his coat. You pick quite the day for a car trouble, son, huh? Claire gave a nervous laugh. Tell me about it. We were on our way to my parents' place. Jamie has been talking about Grandma's hot chocolate all morning. Jamie nodded solemnly, hugging his gift tighter. And I do not want to be late, he said, his voice small but firm, as if Christmas itself depended on their arrival. Elliot crouched by the hood, his breath mingling with the steam rising from the engine. The car looked fine at first glance, but a faint smell of burnt oil told him otherwise. When he lifted the hood, the damage was clear. A snapped belt, a mess of frayed rubber, in oil seeping in all the wrong places. Claire's face fell as she crouched beside Jamie. Is it bad? Elliot hesitated. It is not great, he admitted, but it is fixable. He glanced up, meeting her worried eyes. If you give me a few hours, I will get you back on the road today. Her relief was immediate, though a flicker of gale crossed her face. You do that on Christmas? Sure, he said, straightening up with a faint grin. A kid has got to make it home for Coco, right? Jamie's eyes lit up. And for the first time, Claire smiled, really smiled. It softened her whole face, made the cold seem less cruel. Thank you, Mr. Carter. You have no idea how much this means. Elliot waved it off. Go on inside, warm up a bit. There is coffee and hot chocolate on the counter. As they stepped back into the glow of the shop, Elliot turned to his tools, the hum of the storm fading behind him. It was strange. After so many quiet holidays spent alone, the sound of another voice in his space felt good. As he worked, he caught glimpses of the boy through the window. Jamie's small hands pressed to the glass, watching every movement with awe, and for the first time in a long while, Elliot found himself humming along to the radio, a quiet rhythm rising beneath the storm, unaware that this Christmas morning, this ordinary act of fixing a broken car was about to change everything he thought he knew about home. The hours slipped by in a quiet rhythm, the hiss of snow against the windows, the low hum of the radio, the steady clink of Elliot's tools as he worked beneath the hood, his breath fogged in the cold air each time he exhaled, even with gloves. His fingers had gone numb long ago, yet he did not stop. Every bolt tightened, every wire replaced felt like more than just fixing a machine. It was like holding on to something human, something that mattered. Inside, Claire sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of hot chocolate, the steam softening her pale cheeks. Jamie was perched beside her, swinging his legs off the chair, eyes fixed on the garage window. He is still out there, the boy whispered. He must be freezing. Claire smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He is helping us get home, sweetheart. Let us hope Santa remembers to send him a heater next year. The joke made Jamie giggle, but when he looked back outside, his small hand lifted in a wave through the glass. Elliot looked up just in time to see it and, without meaning to, smiled back. By the time the last bolt clicked into place, the sky had begun to dim. The snow had thickened again, swirling under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Elliot straightened, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, strong, smooth, and steady. He exhaled a long breath of relief, the kind that felt like warmth spreading from the inside out. Pushing the door open, he called into the shop. She is all set. Claire was on her feet in an instant. You fixed it. Elliot nodded, wiping his hands once more. She is as good as new. You will make it home in time for that hot chocolate. For a moment, she just stood there, blinking back tears that caught the shimmer of the Christmas lights. I do not even know how to thank you, she said, reaching for her purse. Please at least tell me what I owe you. Elliot hesitated. He thought about the hours he had spent, the parts he had used, the long, quiet nights he had worked just to keep this place alive. But then he looked at the small boy clutching his gift again, his face glowing with excitement and hope. Elliot's decision came easily. Nothing, he said softly. It is Christmas. Just get where you need to be. Claire froze, her brows knitting. I cannot let you do that, please. You have already done so much. Elliot shook his head, his smile gentle but firm. Consider it my gift to you. Besides, I think someone is waiting for you, and I doubt they would forgive me if I made you late. That was it. The wall she had held up all day broke. Claire set her purse aside and stepped forward, her eyes shimmering. "You have no idea how much this means to me," she whispered, her voice trembling as she wrapped her arms around him in a brief, heartfelt hug. It was quick, just a human moment shared between two strangers, but something in it lingered, something warm and real that neither of them quite expected. "Thank you," she said again, as she pulled away. Elliot only nodded, not trusting his voice to say more. He stood at the doorway as she and Jamie climbed into the car, the taillights glowing red against the falling snow. The boy turned in his seat and waved through the frosted window, his little face lit up with joy. Elliot lifted a hand in return, his chest tight with a feeling he had not known in years as the car disappeared down the quiet road, the sound of its engine fading into the hush of winter. Elliot stayed there alone again, but not lonely. For the first time in a long while, the stillness of his shop did not feel empty. The Christmas lights flickered against the glass, and somewhere deep inside him, something small but certain began to glow. Maybe kindness was its own kind of gift, he thought. One that did not need wrapping paper, just a willing heart. The next morning, the world outside was still draped in white. Snow blanketed the streets, soft and untouched, and the town lay quiet beneath a pale winter sun. Inside Carter's auto repair, the faint smell of coffee filled the air as Elliot leaned over his workbench, trying to focus on a stack of invoices that did not really matter. His mind kept drifting back to the night before, to the way Claire's eyes had glistened in the glow of the shop lights, to the sound of Jamie's laughter fading into the snow. It had been years since something so simple had stayed with him this long. The phone on the counter rang, startling him out of his thoughts. Hardly anyone called this early, especially the day after Christmas. Wiping his hands on a rag, he picked up the receiver. "Carter's Auto Repair," he said, his voice still rough from the cold morning air. "Mr. Carter," a deep, steady voice asked, "this is Robert Bennett. I believe you helped my daughter Claire yesterday." Elliot straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir. They were having car trouble on their way out of town. I hope they made it home all right." "They did," Robert said warmly, "and she has not stopped talking about what you did for them. You have no idea how much that meant to her, to my grandson, and to me." Elliot smiled faintly, though the praise made him uncomfortable. "I am just glad I could help. They seemed like good people, and it did not feel right to charge them on Christmas." There was a pause, the kind filled with quiet understanding. Then Robert spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You know, Mr. Carter, people fix a lot of things in this world. Machines, buildings, numbers. But it is rare to meet someone who repairs trust. My daughter has been through a difficult few years. And your kindness? Well, it reminded her that there are still good people out there." Elliot did not quite know how to respond. He was not used to being seen that way. "I just did what anyone else would have," he said softly. "I do not think so," Robert replied with a low chuckle. "If that were true, the world would look a lot different." The line went quiet for a moment. Elliot could hear faint laughter in the background, a child's voice. Jamie, probably. It brought a small warmth to his chest. "I wanted to call and thank you personally," Robert continued, "but that does not feel like enough. I would like to meet you, Mr. Carter, to shake your hand and thank you properly. Would you mind if I stopped by the shop sometime this week?" Elliot blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, that is really not necessary," he said quickly. "I was just doing my job." "I know you were," Robert said, his voice kind but firm. "I would like to come by. Humor an old man who believes gratitude should be face to face." Elliot let out a small breath, smiling despite himself. "All right," he said at last, "if you insist." "I do," Robert replied. "And Mr. Carter, thank you again. You gave my family something I could not buy, and I do not forget things like that." When the call ended, Elliot set the phone down slowly, the words still echoing in his mind. He looked around the quiet shop, the same walls, the same worn tools, but everything felt slightly different now, warmer somehow. He poured himself another cup of coffee, gazing out through the frosted glass at the snow-covered road. Somewhere out there, a family was sitting around a breakfast table, safe and happy because of what he had done. It was not about money or recognition. It was about connection, about doing something good just because you could. And for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt seen, not as a mechanic, not as a man who worked alone, but as someone who had, in some small way, made the world a little better. 3 days passed, and the world seemed to slip quietly back into its winter rhythm. The roads were clearing, the holiday songs fading from the radio, and life at Carter's Auto Repair returned to its usual stillness. Elliot had almost convinced himself that the phone call from Robert Bennett had been the end of it. A kind gesture, a few kind words, and nothing more. That illusion broke one gray afternoon when the deep rumble of an unfamiliar engine echoed across the lot. Elliot looked up from beneath a pickup truck just as a sleek black SUV pulled into the snow-lined driveway. The door opened and a tall man stepped out, his presence commanding without needing to say a word. Silver hair framed a face lined by time but softened by kindness, and his long wool coat swayed gently in the breeze. "Mr. Carter," the man called, voice steady and sure. Elliot straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "That is me. You must be Mr. Bennett." Robert smiled, extending his hand. "Please call me Robert. I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all," Elliot said, shaking his hand firmly. "Come on in. It is warmer inside." The two men stepped into the small office. The heater buzzed in the corner, doing its best to keep the cold at bay. The smell of oil and coffee mingled in the air. But Robert did not seem to mind. He took a slow look around the room, the organized tools, the faded photographs on the wall, the small Christmas tree still flickering in the corner. "You have built something honest here," Robert said. "It reminds me of my first shop. A little smaller maybe, but filled with the same spirit." Elliot smiled modestly. "It is home, I guess. I started with just a toolbox and a second-hand lift. It is not much, but it keeps the lights on." Robert nodded thoughtfully, his gaze lingering on the grease-stained floor, as if studying more than just the space. "Claire told me you would not take a dime for helping her. That kind of decency is rare these days." Elliot shrugged, a little embarrassed. It was Christmas. I was not going to take money from a mother and her kid trying to make it home. Robert's lips curved into a quiet smile. "That is exactly why I am here." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, setting it gently on the counter between them. "This is for you." Elliot frowned. "What is this? 5,000, Robert said simply. "A small token of appreciation for what you did for my daughter and grandson." Elliot's eyes widened. "Sir, that is far too much. I cannot take this." Robert raised a hand, calm and steady. "You can and you will. It is not charity, it is respect. I run a chain of auto repair shops across the state, and I know exactly what it takes to do what you do. Skill, patience, but most of all, heart. And you have got that in spades." Elliot blinked, trying to take in what he was hearing. "You own a chain of shops." Robert nodded. "Started 30 years ago with one garage, not much different from yours. Now I manage 12, but success does not mean much if you forget what it is built on. Integrity. That is why I wanted to meet you." Elliot looked down at the envelope, his hands hovering over it as if afraid it might disappear. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about what I am about to offer." Robert said, "I could use someone like you in my company, someone who cares about people as much as engines. If you ever want to grow, to take what you do to a bigger stage, there is a place waiting for you." The shop was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, like the world was pausing to let the moment sink in. Elliot had spent years fixing broken things, but no one had ever looked at him like this, as if he was something worth investing in. He swallowed hard, unsure if the warmth in his chest was disbelief or gratitude. I do not know what to say, Robert." Robert smiled, the kind of smile that came from wisdom and faith. "Just say you will think about it. That is all I ask." As he left, the bell over the door chimed softly, and Elliot stood in the same spot long after the SUV disappeared into the distance. The envelope still sat in his hands, heavier than it should have been. It was not just money, it was possibility. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe kindness really did come back around. Sometimes when you least expected it, and in ways that could change your life forever. The days that followed felt unusually quiet. The world had moved on from Christmas, but something inside Elliot had not. The envelope from Robert still sat in his desk drawer, untouched, the weight of it somehow heavier than the money inside. He had opened it once, stared at the bills, then closed it again, as if afraid to disturb whatever strange magic had placed it there. Every so often he would glance at the drawer, wondering if he had imagined it all. The black SUV, the firm handshake, the words that had stayed with him long after Robert left. Someone like you. By midweek, the snow had started to melt. The air held that in-between stillness of late December when the holidays fade, but winter still lingers. Elliot was changing the oil on a customer's truck when the sound of soft footsteps broke the silence. He turned and saw her standing in the doorway. Claire Bennett wrapped in a navy coat, her hair dusted with snowflakes. In her hands, she carried a small wicker basket wrapped in clear cellophane tied with a crimson ribbon. "Hi," she said, her smile gentle, almost shy. "I hope I am not intruding." Elliot wiped his hands on a rag, his surprise quickly melting into warmth. "Not at all. It is good to see you again. Everything running okay with the car?" She nodded. "Like new. Thanks to you." She stepped closer, setting the basket on the counter. "I just wanted to thank you properly. Jamie and I baked some cookies for you. Well, mostly Jamie. I handled the mess afterward." Elliot chuckled. "That is the hardest part." He lifted the corner of the wrapping and saw an assortment of cookies, a small bottle of sparkling cider, and a handwritten card tucked neatly inside. "You did not have to do this." "I know," Claire said softly, "but I wanted to." She hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the office door. "My dad told me he came to see you." "He did," Elliot said, leaning against the counter. "He is a generous man. Left me with more than I deserve." Claire's expression softened. "He told me what he offered." Elliot frowned slightly. "It is a big decision. I have been here so long, it is hard to imagine being anywhere else." Claire nodded, her voice dropping into that calm, thoughtful tone that had comfort woven through it. "Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the best places. You gave us the kind of help most people would not even think of offering. Elliot, maybe it is time you let someone help you for a change." Her words settled in the air between them, gentle yet unshakable. Elliot did not know how to respond. He looked at her, at the way the light from the window touched her hair, at the kindness in her eyes. And for a moment, the shop did not feel so cold anymore. "Claire," he began. "Claire," he began quietly, "I do not even know if I would fit in that world. Your dad runs an empire. I am just a guy who fixes engines and drinks bad coffee." She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "That is exactly why you would fit, because you have not forgotten what matters." Elliot exhaled slowly, his resistance softening. "You really think I should take it?" "I think," she said, "you should stop doubting that you deserve something good." The words landed deep, deeper than he expected. For years, he had built his life around staying where it was safe, fixing what was broken, never daring to want more. But now, looking at her, hearing the quiet conviction in her voice, something shifted. Claire reached for the card from the basket and handed it to him. "Jamie insisted on writing the message himself," she said. Elliot opened it carefully. Inside, written in neat, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for giving us a Christmas miracle. Do not be afraid to share your gift with the world." He stared at it for a long moment, his throat tightening. "That is quite a message." Claire smiled. "He gets that from my dad." Then after a pause, she added softly, "And maybe from you." When she left, the shop fell quiet again, but it did not feel empty anymore. Elliot stood at the counter, the card still in his hand, the scent of cinnamon cookies filling the air. The words echoed in his mind, "Do not be afraid." For the first time in years, he wondered what might happen if he did not let fear make the choices for him. Outside, snow began to fall again. Light, easy, forgiving. It dusted the roof of the shop. The kind of snow that did not bury, only reminded you that change could be beautiful. The next morning, the phone felt heavier than usual in Elliot's hand. He had stared at it for nearly an hour. the words of Claire and the message from Jamie circling in his mind like a quiet song he could not shake. Do not be afraid to share your gift with the world. Finally, before doubt could talk him out of it, he dialed the number scribbled on Robert Bennett's business card. Mr. Bennett, he said when the familiar voice answered, it is Elliot Carter. There was a brief pause, then warmth filled the line. Elliot, I was hoping you would call. Elliot drew in a breath. I have been thinking about what you said, about the position you mentioned. He hesitated, his voice softening. If the offer still stands, I would like to talk about it. Robert's reply came with a smile Elliot could hear. It more than stands. How about lunch tomorrow, my treat? I think it is time we plan that next chapter of yours. The next day they met at a small diner downtown, the kind of place where the coffee never seemed to empty and the smell of pancakes lingered in the air. Robert arrived in a tailored coat and that same quiet confidence, while Elliot showed up in his worn flannel and jeans, still feeling a little out of place. But Robert greeted him like an old friend, shaking his hand firmly before sliding into the booth across from him. I will not waste your time, Robert began, setting aside his menu. I want you to manage one of my shops, a newer location that has been struggling to find its rhythm. It needs someone who knows the work, but more importantly, someone who knows people. You would have full support, a strong team, and the freedom to run things your way. Elliot blinked, taken aback by the trust in those words. That is a lot of responsibility. It is, Robert agreed. But from what I have heard and from what I have seen, you are ready for it. He leaned forward, his eyes steady. You do not just fix cars, Elliot. You help people keep going. That is the difference between a mechanic and a leader. For a long moment, Elliot did not speak. He looked down at his coffee, at the ripples in its dark surface, and saw a reflection of a man who had spent years standing still. Maybe it was time to move forward. I will do it, he said finally, the words surprising even himself. Robert's grin widened. Good. Welcome to the team. The following weeks were a blur of motion, signing papers, arranging logistics, and preparing to close the shop that had been his world for a decade. When the final day came, Elliot stood in the center of the empty space, surrounded by the smell of oil and memory. The walls bore faint outlines where tools had hung for years, and the counter still held the mark of a coffee mug he had set down one too many times. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and let the cold air fill his lungs. It was not sadness he felt. It was something softer, something like peace. This was not an ending. It was simply turning a page. The new garage stood miles away, sleek and modern, with wide glass windows that gleamed beneath the morning sun. The hum of new machines and the scent of fresh paint replaced the familiar creaks and echoes of his old place. For a moment, Elliot just stood there, taking it all in. The energy, the possibility. Robert joined him near the entrance, hands tucked into his coat pockets. How does it feel, he asked. Elliot smiled, his eyes scanning the rows of shining tools, the team already bustling with purpose. Different, Foy admitted, but good. Robert nodded. That is how new beginnings should feel. Then he placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder. Remember this, anyone can repair an engine, but it takes heart to keep people moving. That is what you do, son. You keep them moving. Elliot looked at him, gratitude swelling quietly in his chest. He did not have the perfect words to respond, so he simply nodded. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, steady, familiar. And as he watched it drift past the windows of his new shop, he realized that for the first time in years, he was not just fixing broken things anymore. He was building something new, something that might just last. The first few weeks at the new shop passed in a blur of motion and quiet purpose. Each morning, Elliot arrived before sunrise, unlocking the glass doors to the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of new rubber and fresh paint. It was different from his old garage, bigger, brighter, more modern. But he approached it with the same steady hands and patient heart that had carried him through years of hard work. What he did not expect was how quickly people began to notice. Word spread faster than he imagined. Customers came in for repairs and left with more than fixed cars. They left with stories about a man who cared enough to remember their names, to ask how their kids were doing, to make sure their engines and their spirits were both running smoothly. Some said it felt like bringing their car to a friend, not a business. And somehow that word, friend, stuck. Elliot had never thought of himself as a leader. But as weeks turned into months, he realized that kindness was contagious. His team began mirroring his habits, greeting every customer by name, offering them coffee, and checking in beyond the usual questions about mileage or oil filters. There was laughter in the break room now, a hum of energy in the air that made the place feel alive. On a chilly Friday morning, just as he was finishing paperwork, the front door swung open. "Mr. Carter," a small voice called. He looked up and smiled instantly. Jamie came bounding in, his winter hat askew, cheeks flushed from the cold. Claire followed close behind, carrying a paper bag that smelled unmistakably like freshly baked cookies. "Well, look who it is," Elliot said, crouching down to meet the boy's eye-level issue. "You have grown since I last saw you." Jamie grinned. "Mom says that too, but I think she is just surprised I eat so much." Claire laughed softly. "He is not wrong." Then she turned to Elliot, her eyes warm. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we would stop by. The shop looks amazing. Elliot, Dad was right. You were the perfect choice for this place." Elliot rubbed the back of his neck. "Modest as ever. I just try to keep things running." Jamie reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small red toy car, its paint slightly chipped, the wheels worn from years of play. "This is for you," he said proudly. "For good luck. Mom says it is magic." Elliot froze for a second, touched in a way he could not quite express. He took the tiny car carefully, turning it over in his hand. "Magic, huh? I think I could use a little of that." "You have to keep it on your desk," Jamie instructed. "It only works if it can see everything you fix." "Got it," Elliot said with a chuckle. "Right on the desk it goes." He set it down beside his tools. The little red car catching a glint of sunlight through the window. For reasons he could not explain, it fit there perfectly, as if it belonged all along. Claire watched the moment quietly, her smile softening into something deeper. "He has not stopped talking about you since Christmas," she said. "You really made an impression." Elliot looked at the Pui, who was now exploring the shiny new toolboxes like they were treasure chests. "He made one on me." "Two," he said quietly. "Both of you did." They stayed for a while, chatting easily as customers came and went. Jamie helped hand out candy canes from the counter, earning smiles from everyone he met. And when they finally left, the shop felt lighter, brighter, like the warmth they had brought with them refused to fade. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the garage quieted again, Elliot sat at his desk and glanced at the tiny car. Its red paint gleamed beneath the soft light, a simple reminder of where this all began. A snowy Christmas morning, a stranded family, and a choice to do something kind with no expectation in return. He smiled to himself, realizing that maybe kindness was not just something you gave away. Maybe when you gave enough of it, it had a way of finding its way back. Sometimes in the shape of a child's laughter. Sometimes in the form of a small red car sitting proudly on your desk, reminding you why you started. As winter melted into spring, the rhythm of life at the garage found its steady beat. Customers came and went, the business thrived, and laughter had become as common a sound as the hum of engines. But among all the moving parts of this new life, there were two constants that seemed to find their way back to Elliot: Claire and Jamie. At first, her visits were casual. She would stop by with a basket of muffins for the crew, saying she just happened to be in the area. The men would light up at the sight of her. Her kindness filled the room like sunlight after a storm. Jamie, of course, would dart straight to Elliot's office, checking to make sure the little red toy car was still in its place on the desk. "Still keeping you lucky? You gone to?" he would ask, and Elliot would grin, tapping the hood of the toy, would not dare work without it. Before long, it became a quiet routine. Every Friday, Claire would drop by the shop before closing. Sometimes she would bring coffee, sometimes cookies, but always that warm smile that made the long week fade away. And when the shop lights dimmed and the doors locked, she would invite Elliot to dinner. "It is nothing fancy," she would say with a laugh, "just pasta and too much garlic bread." He always said yes. Those evenings became his favorite part of the week. Claire's apartment was small but full of life, with plants on the windowsill, photos pinned to the fridge, and the faint scent of vanilla and home-cooked meals hanging in the air. Jamie would be at the table, crayons scattered everywhere, drawing cars and stick figures with bright, wild strokes. "That is you, Mr. Carter," he would say proudly, pointing to a doodle of a smiling man holding a wrench. "You fix everything." Elliot would laugh, but inside something deeper stirred. It was not the kind of fixing he had ever been trained for. It was the kind that happened quietly, without tools or manuals, the kind that mended loneliness. Dinner was simple, homemade, imperfect, perfect in every way that mattered. Jamie would talk about school, about his drawings, about how Grandma said he was getting too tall. Claire would listen, teasing gently, her eyes soft when they met Elliot's across the table. Sometimes they would linger there a moment too long, an unspoken warmth passing between them that neither quite knew how to name. One evening after Jamie had gone to bed, Claire poured them each a cup of tea. The night outside was calm, moonlight spilling across the kitchen floor. She leaned back in her chair, studying him quietly. "You know," she said softly, "I cannot remember the last time Jamie laughed this much, or the last time I felt this at ease." Elliot set his cup down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe that is what happens when people find the right company." She smiled at that. But there was something tender in her eyes, something that hinted at understanding. "You mean family?" she said. The word hung in the air between them, gentle and powerful all at once. Elliot did not answer right away. He just looked around. The small apartment, the photographs, the faint sound of Jamie's laughter drifting from the other room, and felt something shift inside him. For so many years he had been content to live quietly, surrounded by engines and silence. But this was noise he did not want to live without. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the way Claire's laughter filled the spaces he did not realize were empty. He looked back at her, his voice warm and sure. "Yeah," he said softly. "Family sounds about right." She did not reply, but the smile that touched her lips said everything. In that moment, neither of them needed to say more. The distance between them was not distance anymore. It was belonging. And as Elliot walked home that night, the cool breeze carrying the faint scent of vanilla and laughter with him, he realized that for the first time in years, his life did not feel like something he was fixing. It felt like something he was finally building. A year later, Christmas returned like a gentle promise, blanketing the town once more in quiet white. Inside the garage, golden light spilled from the windows, flickering across the snow like warmth reaching into the cold. The air was filled with laughter, soft holiday music, and the comforting clatter of mugs and conversation. Elliot's shop, his shop, was alive. It was not just a workplace anymore. It had become something closer to a family gathering. Employees mingled with customers. Children played near the decorated tree, and the smell of cinnamon and fresh pine hung in the air. Near the center of it all, Elliot stood beside Claire and Jamie, their faces glowing beneath the string of twinkling lights they had hung together the night before. "Looks good, does it not?" Claire said, adjusting one of the ornaments. Elliot smiled, his eyes soft. "Better than anything I could have done on my own." Jamie beamed, holding up a star nearly too big for his hands. "Can I put it on top now?" "Go for it, champ," Elliot said, lifting him up so he could reach the highest branch. The star caught the light as Jamie placed it perfectly, the room breaking into a gentle cheer. When Elliot set him down, the boy turned proud and breathless. "Mom says that means we are done decorating." Claire laughed. "I think that means we are ready for Cocoa." They moved toward the counter where mugs waited, each one steaming with chocolate and topped with marshmallows. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and steady, just as it had a year ago when their lives first crossed paths. And in that moment, Elliot could not help but think how far they had come. From strangers in the cold to this little circle of warmth that now felt like home. The sound of the front door opening broke through the chatter. A familiar voice called out, rich and warm. "I hope I am not late." Robert Bennett stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. His presence still carried that quiet authority, but tonight there was something lighter about him, something almost paternal. In his hand was a crisp white envelope. He made his way through the crowd, smiling at the employees who greeted him like an old friend before stopping in front of Elliot. "You have done more than just run this place well," Robert said, his voice steady but full of pride. "You have built something special here." Elliot looked humbled. "I just tried to keep things moving." Robert chuckled, shaking his head. "No, son, you did not just change a business. You changed my daughter's life." He handed Elliot the envelope. Inside was a contract, his name printed alongside Robert's. "I would like you to become a partner in the company," Robert said simply. "You have earned that and more." For a long moment, Elliot did not move. The world seemed a blur. The laughter, the music, the smell of pine and cocoa. Then he reached out, shaking Robert's hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for trusting me." Robert smiled. "You made it easy." Beside them, Claire watched, her eyes shining. She stepped closer, slipping her hand into Elliot's. "I told you good things happen when you let people in," she whispered. Elliot turned to her, his fingers tightening around hers. "You were right," he said softly. "You both were." Before he could say more, Jamie bounded over, his grin wide. "Does this mean we all work together now, Mom, Grandpa, and you?" He looked from one face to the other, his excitement bubbling over. "That means I have a date and a was in the same place, bio." The room burst into laughter. Even Robert could not help but laugh, ruffling Jamie's hair. "Sounds like a full house to me." As the evening drifted on, the tree lights shimmered, the snow kept falling, and the garage buzzed with warmth and joy. Elliot stood there, surrounded by people who had once been strangers, but now felt like home, and realized that the miracle of Christmas had never been about luck or money. It was about this: the unexpected ways hearts could find each other, the small acts of kindness that turned into love, the family that was built not by blood, but by choice. And as Jamie tugged on his sleeve, asking to hang one last ornament, Elliot smiled and knelt beside him, helping him place it gently on the tree. "Perfect," he whispered. "Just perfect." And maybe that is what Christmas and life is really about. Not the gifts we unwrap, but the people who walk into our stories and never leave. Elliot, Claire, and little Jamie found each other on a cold December day, and somehow that simple act of kindness turned into a forever home. In the quiet hum of a snowbound garage on Christmas morning, Elliot discovered that the most unwanted jobs can become the doorway to the richest life, where kindness costs nothing, yet rebuilds everything. Fixing Claire's car for free was not charity. It was the choice to see a child's hope over a paycheck, to pour light into strangers when his own world had gone dark. Claire, armored in grief and guilt, learned that redemption begins not with grand gestures, but with the courage to return color to a child's canvas, to open locked doors and let shared sorrow forge unbreakable bonds. Their story teaches a timeless truth. Generosity is the spark that thaws frozen hearts. It turns overlooked roles into legacies, solitary holidays into communal feasts, and fractured pasts into golden futures where every crack tells a story of healing. Elliot, who once measured worth in wrenches and silence, found that opening your shop and your soul on the coldest day invites a warmth that lasts forever. What about you? When has an unwanted task or a stranger's need pulled you from isolation into unexpected family? Was it a free repair, a returned gift, or the moment you chose people over profit? Share your light in the comments. Let us fill this space with proof that every overlooked job holds magic. And if these tales of garage miracles and rebuilt homes warm your heart, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Because every week we gather here to remember, the best lives are driven not by engines, but by the quiet revolutions of open hands and willing hearts.